Hello, everybody. Welcome to Branding Bud Live, the live stream that's 100% THC, 0% WTF. Every week, we bring business people together to talk about the business of cannabis. I'm David Palashuk, the founder of the Branding Bud Consulting Group and the author of the first book on cannabis branding, Branding Bud, the Commercialization of Cannabis. And I'm joined by my co-host and best cannabis friend, Adriana Hemans, a marketing executive with over 8 years experience in the cannabis space. Welcome, Adriana.
Thanks, David. How are you today?
I am awesome.
Have you recovered from your jet lag?
Yes, I am finally recovered. I think it's taken me longer to recover coming back from Thailand than the amount of time I've spent in Thailand. But all good. I'm excited about today's show. We've got some really, really awesome guests.
Yes, we have some awesome guests. We're talking about trade shows today, which I know is like on the top of everybody's list. It's trade show season. It's in full swing, and those calendars are getting stacked up, but it's all good because we love to reconnect with our friends. And speaking of friends, this show is meant to be very interactive. So if you are in the audience and you're listening in or watching in, can you say watching in? If you are with us today, feel free to say hi. Say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're from, and and feel free to ask questions too.
Absolutely. And we've got people on Clubhouse listening in too. So if you want to join in, best place is LinkedIn Live. So thanks for joining us, and we're super excited. The title of our show today is Fragmented and Flourishing, Cannabis Branded Events. And Adriana, as you just said, we are in, trade show season, and it's pretty interesting because in the cannabis space, everybody is figuring out what shows to go to, what are the parties and after parties and connected parties and events that are happening. So we're pretty excited, and we've got two very, very hot topics to talk about, and two owners of probably the hottest brands or trade show events happening, which is we've got Unpacked owner or co-founder, Jage, and we have Sid Patel, who's the founder of the Cannabis Drinks Expo, with us today. We're going to be talking about a few things. What is the overall state of the industry? Why is there a move toward hyper-regional events? And really, how does the fragmented landscape of the cannabis industry play into the trade shows? And why are the shows where they are and when they are? And we're going to get some really interesting insight from both George and Sid today. So that said, I'm really excited to chat with them. Should we bring them out?
Let's do it.
All right.
And hi, Meryl.
Ta-da!
There they are.
Welcome.
Hi, guys. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Sid. Hi, George.
How are you doing? David and Adriana, thanks for having us. Sid, thanks for letting me do this with you. Appreciate you.
Same here. Thanks, Adriana. Thanks, David. Hello, everyone. Looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, this is pretty amazing. I'll just call out that actually both George and I are in Seattle. Adriana is in Los Angeles, and Sid is in London. So this is pretty cool. And for those folks, Meryl is from San Francisco. So we got folks all around the world here to chat with us today, and that's pretty amazing. We're pretty excited about that. So thanks for being with us. Let's kick it off. Sid, you have created not only the Cannabis Drinks Expo, but many other trade shows related primarily to wine and spirits, both in the US and the UK. Would you just take a minute and give us a quick take on the parallels between regulated markets in this case, wine and spirits, versus cannabis?
Sure. I think the sales and marketing side of this business is very similar. So when you are knocking, retail outlets or bars or restaurants, it's the same way you are opening accounts in dispensaries, So the whole sales and distribution model of the way brands are placed or the support programs to the retailers, it's pretty much similar. The markups obviously differ from state to state here in cannabis, but in alcohol, they are also pretty much 30%, 40%. But I think sales and distribution is really the common factor there. So it's basically very easy for a wine and beer spirits distributor or a beer distributor, if the obviously law allowed, to pick up a cannabis brand and hit the road, because they know how to sell. Then comes the making side of it. So when they are used to the innovation, so same happened with no alcohol beverage products, right? So we're seeing a growth there as well, and CBD is the same thing. So the wine and spirits industry is really mature enough to know where the next consumer is, and we think, and that's why we started this, where it's going to be more of CBD as the new consumer, and people are switching from alcohol. So I can see a lot of big brands putting their money there, and we'll obviously chat later on, on what my thoughts are there. But that's where I think the making and the distribution has similarities. It's just the legalities which are stopping, for everyone to do everything, sort of thing, in wine and spirits.
This is really cool. Yeah, Sid's events focus on beverages, of course. And then our guest, George, his events, MJ Unpacked, are focused on investors and happen in Las Vegas and New York. So question for you, George, why those two cities?
Well, let me take a step back. Our event isn't focused on investors per se. I mean, it's certainly an important part of the hub of the wheel that we're building. But, MJ Unpacked, we launched this show really only about 16 months ago. And it's the only national show that features brands and retailers from around the entire country, really at a single location. And so we really give the opportunity to see the kind of landscape of where cannabis is moving as a CPG industry. And, we have done them in New York and Las Vegas. We're going to be actually doing our fall show in Detroit. We'll be announcing that formally soon, but I guess you can hear it first on Branding Bud. And kind of going back to what Sid said, I mean, there are tremendous parallels to alcohol, and the distribution model and the sales model are expected, right? We're not there yet. We're building a national CPG show for an industry that doesn't have a national CPG market. So I would almost say that Sid and I are kind of from the future, waiting for the rest of the world to catch up with us. But when you look at where the trajectory of cannabis is going, it is a CPG industry. It will behave very similar to the alcohol model with distribution and state taxes and regulations. But what I've seen out there in the trade show space for so long, and having built MJ BizCon, is that most of the events out there are all supply side shows, and we've moved way beyond that in this industry. Anybody who's standing up a license today isn't looking for light bulbs and label makers anymore. They're looking for capital. They're looking for partnerships. They're looking for distribution. They're looking for license deals. And this is ultimately where we go as an industry. So we wanted to create an event that the industry deserves, that's stewarded responsibly, that's not in the business of just selling real estate and tickets, but really driving value.
I love that. And to our audience, if you have questions about what it's like in the future, then definitely drop them in the chat. Hi to Becky from Texas, and hi to my mom, Caroline, who is in upstate New York at the State University of Potsdam, talking about the cannabis business class they teach up there, which is awesome. And hi to Katrina from Denver. Welcome, everyone.
From Love's Oven. She's got great products. Love Katrina.
George, just quickly, I mean, we're talking about the regionalization here. And the one thing I didn't mention, and forgive me, let me even step back for a moment. You had a big part in the development of MJ BizCon, which for 12 years now has been the one main event that everybody shows up in Vegas for annually, and it's gotten so big and really somewhat unmanageable that people get lost there. They don't actually know why they're there. And right now the industry is so big, from agricultural machines, through extraction machines, through rolling machines, through brands that might show up there. It's too much for everybody. So 12 years, annual show, MJ BizCon. You came out, I want to say 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, with MJ Unpacked, which is really a focus on, and just to be clear, not only investors but brands, and pulling those together. That to me is really interesting, and so it was really this more focused show. Sid has done the same thing with his beverages.
Yeah.
Tell us how brands sort of rise to the top in a situation like that in a fragmented industry?
Well, sure. And a couple of points you brought up there. I mean, as far as, regionalization and everything else, and MJ BizCon, and, when I took over there was only one full-time employee, and was able to bring a lot of experience from building a global trade show for the tea industry, which also has a lot of parallels to cannabis, and other industries, and really being able to kind of, meet the needs of the moment of the market, with this event. And any event, regardless of if it has international attendance, is going to have a certain regional component to it. And this is why Sid's doing his in Chicago. Tons of brands in Chicago, right? There's certainly a lot of beverage companies in Chicago. It's a good location for him. San Francisco as well. And it's not about, listen, we've gone through a pretty tough economic downturn. And when things are tough, people are cutting back travel and marketing budgets. So if they're going to invest time and money to get out of their office and go and travel to a show, and they can go to Sid's show and talk specifically about beverage, they can come to our show and talk about beverage, flour, CPG packaged goods, and everything else that we have at our event. It's going to be a higher return on their objectives and their investment of time and money. Going to a show like MJ BizCon, I'm very proud of the work I did to create that event, and with some really talented people. But you might have 100 leads from that show, and one or two of them will actually pan out. You go to Sid's show, and if you're a beverage company, that the people that are coming to that show are specifically interested in the beverage category and have a direct relationship. And because of our qualification at MJ Unpacked, you have to be a brand retailer, a cultivator, a licensed operator with the title manager hire. So we only have an executive level audience that's highly vetted that's coming to our show. I think it comes down to is, how do you create a good return on objectives for people's time and money, and especially in a scarce market when, people have to make choices if they're going to go to, one show, or they're going to go to two shows, but they're not going to 6 or 7 anymore.
Right.
Yeah. What I love about your show, about MJ Unpacked, having participated, I think, a couple times now, is how you were just saying, it's such a targeted audience. And being at course compliance, where we're selling software to retailers, it's that the people in the room are the people that you want to talk to. So it can be really impactful to participate. And you just mentioned a second ago, George, sort of the ups and downs that we're looking at. And I know that through your role, you've seen a lot of brands come and go. Any thoughts on what's the secret sauce of branding?
Yeah, well, that's the $1 million question. I mean, when you look at kind of the evolution of the cannabis market, and again, going back to, when I was running MJ Biz, I mean, there was a need to get equipment and machines and labeling and everything else to stand up your licenses, and then we kind of moved in this expansion era. And most of the time in the cannabis industry, which is unique, that the relationship with the consumer has lived with the retailer, because you go to a store and you are going to be subjected to choose from the selection that is probably limited of what's available in the marketplace of maybe gummies or tinctures or flour, based on the relationship of that retailer. But we're really kind of entering that golden age of brands right now, and we're starting to see more ways that the brands can directly build relationship with the consumer. They're doing some direct DTC models are starting to emerge. Twitter's allowing advertising for cannabis brands, because Elon Musk probably realized that he's tanking the company. But when you look at what is that secret sauce, I mean, you're branding experts. That it's how do you create an emotional reaction or relationship with the consumer with your product. And I would argue that there's probably not a product out there in the world that can create an emotional response better than cannabis in the consumer. So can you tell your story? Can you communicate that story through your packaging and your product, and really be able to create a relationship with that consumer, so when they come back to the store, they're not just saying, give me a gummy, I want your gummy, or I want your flour.
Absolutely. I mean, George, you make a great point, and I'm going to flip this over to Sid, because so when we talk about emotional connections, it's a fact, believe it or not, that the number one brand that people, can you believe this, that people tattoo on themselves is Pabst Blue Ribbon. And so obviously there's an emotional connection when you're willing to tattoo Pabst Blue Ribbon on your body. And
I worked at Pabst Blue Ribbon in college in the microbiology labs. However, I will say I do not have a PBR tattoo on me.
I know
not too late.
two people that have PBR tattoos. But that said, Sid, we've seen large MSOs come into the beverage space. We've seen smaller brands come into the beverage space. We've seen PBR through Pabst Labs come into the beverage space, cannabis infused beverage space. How is the beverage form factor different than other form factors because these emotional ties are already created?
I think sorry, if you can elaborate the question, I'm trying to understand. So is the consumer attraction the same way in alcohol brands versus cannabis brands?
Well, in this case, for example, with PBR, there's such a history of
yeah. So I think with that, it's more of a nostalgia. So if tomorrow Budweiser comes up with cannabis brand, you're going to have the same following, go there and try, right? So these are actual nostalgia brands, and there is loyal following there, which obviously like if Can is trying to make, but there is that benefit. This whole industry, like when a big player like even Coke or anyone steps into this beverage category, they're going to bring their fans. So I just think that is for sure going to happen. Back on what you said, where I see similarities is really they know how to brand because they're expert. They know exactly how the mechanics of branding works, because they've been doing that in beverages. It's just alcohol. Now it's just the cannabis. They have to they have to apply the same principles and methods. In making that branding.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that too. I mean, when we look at cannabis and where kind of the form factors are being introduced, I mean, beverage is still a very small component of this, but we have millennia of history of consuming beverages and as a form of intoxicant through beer, wine, spirits, and everything else. And as cannabis continues to expand, we know the flower is still really strong because the traditional consumers like myself, prefer flower. But, when we jump into kind of the future of where this goes, and certainly the younger generations that are going to be coming of adult age, I think that beverage is going to be one of the top categories in our industry. And it's going to be so much easier to replace the intoxicant than the form of social lubrication that we're all accustomed to, of going to bars, going to a restaurant, ordering a Granddaddy Purple and Coke. There's great products coming out in the marketplace all the time. And if I can just shamelessly, I want to give a shout out to Stacy Primack, who keeps commenting in the post. She had one of the best cannabis infused dinners. She's an amazing chef that I've ever had in Seattle. If you do another one, Stacy, let Dave and I know. We'll be there.
Absolutely.
Hi, Stacy. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for joining us. And also for calling out Jones Soda too. Again, it's these the recognition of
I think I'll add a couple of other things here. Like a lot of cannabis drinks is the longest play that I see happening in cannabis industry, because it's a very hard category right now, and especially investors drying up. It's a survival of the fittest game, but the upside is the highest. So any big brands that are in there have imagined this as a 10-year plan. So it's got the highest upside, as George said. Like once this becomes as a social consumption drink, this will be breaking the cannabis category, because it breaks the social way we consume cannabis.
Yeah. And this might be a point where we differentiate a little bit, Sid. And listen, I mean, I know that you've got a lot of relationships in the wine and alcohol industry. I mean, this is one of the things that keeps me up at night, is that, we know that at some point in time, all of the big beverage companies and alcohol companies are either kind of dipping their toes in, I mean, maybe a little bit more overtly with Coors Molson and the Canopy deal, Anheuser-Busch family members, starting cannabis companies. But at some point when we see that federal legalization, those companies are going to be exceptionally well capitalized, have tremendous CPG discipline that you're talking about, and they're going to go out and try to just soak up the whole market.
100%.
If we lose the thought leadership of the cannabis industry to alcohol or tobacco, I think that we've lost. I think that cannabis is completely unique, and the people that I meet every day in this industry are coming from it from a whole plant medicine and a compassion standpoint, reducing societal harm, reducing physiological harm to people as a vice. And I don't want, it's not that we don't want alcohol to come in. They can bring a lot of value, but they better not kick everybody out, because then we lost.
No, what's going to happen is really they're going to start buying cannabis brands. So all these small brands, are playing a lot of valuation games here. Till it's just the moment the laws are getting passed, Anheuser-Busch doesn't have time to make a brand from scratch. They're just going to buy a can or something like that, and so
Sure.
it's really these brands know what is going to happen the moment floodgates open.
Correct. And big companies don't innovate. They buy innovation, like you said.
Correct.
I mean, they buy the Honest Teas and the Snapples and the Monster Energy drinks or whatever.
Yep.
But again, if they come in and they think that they're just going to kind of replicate what they've done in the alcohol space with cannabis and not understand the passion and the compassion behind the plant and the healing benefits of this plant, not just to society but to the planet. Again, we will lose if we don't maintain the thought leadership of the cannabis industry as this industry goes national.
It's funny. I'd like to chime in here just quickly. I think it's just to be clear. I think it's much more complicated than, if you will, cannabis versus alcohol. I think there's CPG involved here. There's pharma involved here. There's all sorts of things. And I think one of the things which is really intriguing to me is, so having worked with Mountain Dew for many years, Mountain Dew now has an alcohol beverage. And so what they've seen are their young little 13-year-old pimply skateboarder, kids grow up over the course of that brand. And so Sid, almost bringing it back to the nostalgia fact. So
yeah,
you see Mountain Dew with an alcohol, beverage. It's really interesting to see those 13-year-old kids have grown up to be 18 or 21, year old plus. So I see that taking place too. There's a lot of grabs from a lot of different industries trying to get their head around what cannabis will be in the future.
Yeah, I think a lot of things, something that's also overlooked a lot is people tend to think of like people who are drinking cannabis or people who are drinking alcohol. These are totally separate occasions, and that's not necessarily the case. There can be a lot of overlap coming from consumer insights. There's 40% of the time people are doing both at the same time. So that can they can peacefully and harmoniously exist together, I think.
There is a multiplication factor when you do that, but as long as you manage your intoxication.
Yeah, totally. I feel like we could talk about this for a long time, but I want to tee up our audience participation. Our chat is super active today. And thank you, Stacy, for mentioning what's happening in Minnesota. They're allowing THC drinks to be sold in traditional outlets, which is exciting to see. We were talking a little bit about branding, and we were talking about the connection between the consumer and the brand and that emotional connection. And I wanted to talk a little bit about advertising, which, as we know, is a big hurdle for the industry. Traditional advertising channels have been shut down to cannabis brands until recently, as we talked about a little bit earlier. So today's Canna Truth is, in 2022, there were more cannabis-related tweets than tweets about A, coffee, B, golf, C, the NHL, or D, all of the above. Please feel free to take a guess.
Yeah. And this is great, especially, actually, George, you mentioned about, the channel opening up and Elon trying to make up for maybe some of his mistakes.
Elon's Hail Mary pass.
That's right. That's
Elon also likes to smoke a good joint once in a while too. So let's just be honest there.
That's true. But it's kind of crazy that the channel opens up because the owner likes to consume every so often. But this is really interesting. And again, this brings back. We're talking about normalization. We're talking about what Stacey mentioned. We're talking about channels opening up. We're talking about the ability for people to connect with brands in more ways than one. So, audience, what do you think?
I'm counting 4 votes for D, all of the above, and 1 vote for A, coffee.
That's right. George, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my original guess was D, but I also have the script, so I know what the answer is. They may be the same.
They might. Sid?
Yeah, same. But I was guessing B and C. I thought coffee would be still more popular.
Yeah.
All right. And the answer is?
All of the above. So this stat came from AdCan. It was published February 26th this year. and it was about Twitter's new policy. And I should mention too that it is all of the above. So it's coffee, golf, and the NHL, but not combined. There were more cannabis-related tweets about coffee, and they also beat out golf and the NHL. Interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, maybe there's more hope for the Twitter channel than I had originally thought.
And all those industries have safe banking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wonder how the accounts are taking ad money, but yeah.
Yeah. I started a Twitter ad account just as a side note, and it took me like almost 2 weeks to get it approved. So there were some hurdles still, even though it's technically legal now. If you don't mind, I just want to like jump over and asking a few more questions to our guests. And this one is for George. And this is about sort of like the regionality of the cannabis industry. And what do you see as the role of having a national event when we have such regional state markets that are so different?
Yeah, I think it's just, again, it's looking at where we're going, not where we've been. And it's challenging too. I mean, you think about what's happened in California and, what these growers and cultivators were faced with when they were supplying, the entire country with weed prior to the option to go legal, and then have to lose 95% of their serviceable market by, getting licensed in the state of California, or remain illegal and have a target on their back. I mean, it's a zero-sum game. Like we see markets, all over the country that are starting to see price compression. I was in one state market, I'll leave nameless, that I could go to a dispensary and get an ounce for $20, and it was decent weed. It's just there's this race to the bottom because of oversaturation of licenses, and interstate commerce solves a lot of those problems. It allows people to create economies of scale, allows brands to move between state markets and compete on quality, freshness, on their testing, on their brand storytelling, not just trying to race to the bottom on price, because that's a zero-sum game for everybody. And what we see, and after our first New York event, I must have had a dozen of our exhibitors from our previous Las Vegas event that were in New York. They're like, I'm based in California, I can't wait to get out of there. I need to, I'm originally from the East Coast. So, I think brands, at least the smart money, or maybe it's not the smart money, but at least the lighter wallets, realize that they can go state to state and set up licensing deals, create an IP brand that they can have a multiple state presence without having to go to each state, go through a license process, and invest millions of dollars to stand up an operation, each being taxed separately and punitively. The IP license deal is clean. It's easy. It still requires us to have operators in those states that are open for business for doing white labeling, though.
It's true, and just you made that sound so easy, but
if it were only so easy, right?
Yeah, when you think about a brand too, and the consistency, consistency is what a brand is, right? So now you're in one market where a minimum serving size is 10 megs of THC, and another where it's 5, and and others where in the medical side it's 50. So it's just it's just.
I think that depends on the product too. Like Rusty from Old Pal, great IP branding, story there. He was, I think he started out trimming at somebody's cultivation in California, and now he's got a brand that's in, I think, 10 to 15 states. And his brand model is like, this is an everyman's, everyday kind of weed that you can share with your friends, right? And so I'm not selling like super premium, super expensive weed. It's the type of stuff you're happy to pass out at a party. It's decent, it's enjoyable, it's priced right, it's economical, right? And I think other companies, like, and I don't know the exact formulation for Can, but when Can's going state to state, they've already got their formulation of their beverage. So really all they need is THC as an active ingredient. So, it's probably a fairly easier thing for them to have SOPs and controls on. Now you move into somebody that, has a very specific product that's, maybe live resin or anything else. I think that gets really difficult to manage state to state from consistency standpoint. But there's companies out there, Wild, Wana, others that are really building a national footprint. And it's going to be interesting. I mean, this is really where the wealth creation, Sid touched on this before. I mean, where we're going to see the true wealth creation and the kind of generational wealth that everybody talks about is going to happen on the CPG brand side. And America is one of the biggest exporters of brands globally. So as this market grows and brands establish dominance in the United States, they're going to have huge opportunities internationally to expand their product footprint.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Sid, so along those lines, you know, we're talking about the long game, but right now there's so many small companies that are just holding on, you know, just trying to figure out where they're going to exhibit next or how they're going to get to their next investor. What do you, you know, what do you share with brands who want to come to your show? What can they find at your show? Is it new consumers? Is it investors? Is it manufacturers? Is it partners, you know, licensees like George just mentioned in other states?
Yeah, so right now, actually, that is the biggest thing that they all want, co-packers, because you know they're all trying to expand other states, and especially the new states that are opening up, like East Coast. You know, so we are trying to make it more of a national presence, where we're inviting a lot of co-packers at the show, so the business can happen at this both locations. So that's one thing for sure. And second thing, I think they're looking still is for money, because you know, as I said, like, you know, cannabis beverage market is still looking to raise some funds. But back to, I think, how they're navigating this is there are three ways. You know, one is a small entrepreneur who's just trying, who's, you know, made up this, who wants to do this and is, you know, distributing in some local dispensaries and getting organic growth, like bootstrapping. You know, one is, you know, like Boston Beer Company, which is waiting to make the best product. Like their focus on quality and product development is the focus. So the moment they're going to come out with their product, they want to make sure that it's completely a repeat order sort of product, right? Because they don't have a distribution problem. They can go to Target tomorrow and they can get the job done. For them, it's more of, you know, consumption. And then there are companies, you know, who are playing the reverse game from the retailers. There are a lot of companies I know that they have the connections in CPG, like Targets and the Walmarts of the world, and they're sort of playing the game of their distribution models. And the moment this becomes federal, you know, and big supermarket is going to place the brand, everything is going to start working. So everyone's navigating very differently. But for example, if you're aiming for Targets and the Walmarts, you need investors. You know, if you're just looking for just bootstrapping and organic growth, then yeah, it's tough, because it's purely on dispensary and retailers giving you a chance.
I'm excited for the next international cannabis show. And I love what you were just saying about being able to expand and bring US brands to the entire world.
And I think I agree with George. Like, I'm also seeing a little bit of a saturation in California. So Chicago, surprisingly, has been hotter for us than San Francisco. But I think it maybe for the same reasons is explained. And a lot of East Coast people are moving. So similar, like as I said, like we just have to see where next. So we may be going East Coast as well, you know, alternate maybe. But it looks like
part of the problem with Illinois is just it lacks diversity in its license ownership. I mean, it's really been kind of primarily dominated by a handful of MSOs in the space that control the entire vertical. And I have a lot of OG friends that are in the Chicago area. They drive to Michigan to get their weed because they can get a better quality product up there and a cheaper price. So, you know, I think, you know, part of the challenge with beverage, I absolutely agree, is going to be a huge part of this industry and a huge category over time. But we have to see federal legalization. I mean, the high capital costs of manufacturing a beverage and the transportation costs, because there's liquids involved and everything else. It's a very capital intensive part of the business. And yeah, I mean, like, look at Ken, huge success story, but you know, I think that they're still, you know,
making money yet.
Find capital, right? And the capital markets are incredibly dry right now, especially in cannabis.
You know, and just to call out, I think we had this as a stat in the last 2 weeks, which is Can has more brand recognition in Illinois than it does in California.
Even though they're from California originally.
Yeah. So, I mean, these are all really interesting things, you know, as we talk about building.
I think for us, David, it's really people who are in for the long, you know. Ours is very different category, like and very niche, like in fact, really niche, because you just want everything to do with cannabis drinks in this. So, and we also, you know, as an organizer, we have to see our capabilities and our ecosystem, and our ecosystem is alcohol bev. So the day, for me, it's very easy to get 1,000 bartenders and sommeliers if it was, right? So we also have to consider our own ecosystems and how we are adding value to our wineries, dispensaries, other makers with cannabis industry.
Right.
And since we're on the topic of regional, national, international, looking at all these different state markets and what it all means, this puzzle piece, I want to again turn it over to our audience and ask them to weigh in on this question. See if you can guess the answer. And this is not just the cannabis industry. This is the trade show industry overall. What types of events have been attended or sponsored more by business professionals in the U.S. from 2015 to 2021, regional, national, or international?
And we ask this question really because what we try to do every week is bridge the gap between the cannabis world and the real world, and try to take a look at things happening in other industries that we know will eventually happen or have been happening in the cannabis space. So, we look at these things in parallel. We try to thread trends together and better understand things through data points. And so in talking about regional versus national trade shows and events, we were curious, what do other events, in the U.S. non-cannabis events, how does that play out on a regional, national, or international scale? So we've got a mixed bag here. We've got a couple of B's and A and a C.
Less of a consensus on this one than the previous. I'm seeing 3 A's, 2 B's, and 1 C, so pretty mixed. While we give people a chance to weigh in, should we turn to a question here? Let me find this person's name. Sorry. The question is from Becky Little. Branding is very fragmented. Is it currently profitable? Anyone care to weigh in on that one?
I mean, as far as branding, if you're talking about a cannabis brand, I think any licensed cannabis operation is probably one of the most difficult businesses you could run in the United States right now. I mean, you have massively punitive tax code and lack of access to safe banking, changing regulatory structures and everything else. But, as far as, again, brands, there's plenty of brands that are out there are profitable. And I think, just depends on how they're set up and structured. But again, I think the long play, and Sid mentioned, people that are looking to play the long play, CPG brands are going to be where the most wealth creation is going to happen in our industry.
Yep, agreed. We're still not there. We got a long way to go.
And to answer your question, that this is trade shows in general. Yeah, not just cannabis.
Yes. Sid, any thoughts? Regional?
I was just going to say about the branding thing. I think, right now we are all forced by state laws to sort of just come up and deviate. Every state looks a little different because of some other things that we have to add. But again, everyone knows what the future looks like, which is the bullish, view to all this. So, but once, everything unifies, I think the ROI of branding and marketing will come in effect better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's reveal the answer, shall we?
Let's do it.
It's regional. And this stat is from Statista, which is a market research firm that covers all industries. And the stat is from 2023 that on average, business professionals in the US attended or sponsored regional trade shows almost 2 times as much as national trade shows.
Right.
I would not have expected that in aggregate, maybe for cannabis, but not in aggregate. Surprising.
Yeah. And so it's interesting to see that, right? We kind of come almost full circle to just double check what's happening in the real world to say, well, most trade shows are regional trade shows, and that's how business is done. So, so it's interesting to see that, to think about that, and maybe learn from that.
And it comes down to, you got to understand the purchasing, kind of behavior of the attendee, and they're going to look at events and they're going to have to weigh in how much it's going to cost for them to travel there. Is it drivable? Do they have to spend 3 or 4 days out of the office? Are they flying all the way across the country for it? So people are always going to gravitate towards events that have a lower cost, of time and money for them to attend to. And certainly when we've been out on the West Coast, we see a majority of our attendance from the West Coast, and I'm sure Sid sees the same, and vice versa. What's really interesting is that, in our New York show, our second largest attended state is California right now.
Yep.
Yeah. So coming out of this, we know that both of you have shows coming up. Would you share a little bit? I mean, George, you're literally in the home stretch. You're 3 weeks away. Sid, you are sitting mid-event where you are right now and preparing to come back to the U.S. George, would you take a minute and just give us an update on MJ Unpacked and what's happening in the next 4 weeks?
Sure, but you got to stop giving me agita. We're actually 5 weeks away from the show as of yesterday, so you keep shortening that time frame, and I got a lot to do. But listen, when we started this event, and we saw New York as a really prime market, we had to book that venue before the hotel, while the hotel was closed, and we had our event last year, certainly hoping that the market would be moving forward a little bit faster than it did. But coming into New York right now is the right show at the right time in the right place. There's not a lot of crowding on the convention center, on the convention calendar, geographically or chronologically. And the excitement around our event is been a little bit overwhelming. People are really enthusiastic about coming there. We have tons of the new card license holders coming. We have Axel Burnaby, who wrote the True Parties of Interest legislation, who's the number 2 person over at the OCM, speaking in the Venture Summit. We have Chris Alexander, the number 1 guy over at the OCM, speaking in our main conference program. We're flying out 4 legacy farmers from California to talk about regenerative farming. It's just, this is such an important time. And I know how hard it is for people's businesses right now. But if you're a retailer and if you don't pick your head up and build your network so that when you face a challenge, you have 5 or 6 people and you're friends with that can help you solve that problem. If you try to do it alone, this is too hard for anybody, in my opinion. You need to have a really strong network of peers to be able to succeed in this space.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Sid, you're mid show right now over in Europe, but you're gearing up for your 2 shows here in the U.S. Do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Sure. Thanks, David. So our dates are 27th of July in San Francisco and August 1 in Chicago. So it's just over a period of 4 days back to back. The idea is that brands can just be in one circuit and, keep on their networking and marketing and meetings, when they are doing their events mode. I think this year we are really, every year, we've grown into making it more serious show, meaning quality buyers, as I said, like we really also vet buyers and investors. So it's really becoming a show where it's very clear that if you have anything to do with cannabis drinks, if you want to get started, or if you're looking for a co-packer, or if you're looking for cannabis beverages, or if you're looking to invest in cannabis beverages, this is the show. We also educate a lot. Our conference is one of our strong things. So, over this 2 days, we really go deep into the subject of cannabis beverages. So really talk about product formulations to, all other stuff. So I think what you can expect coming on that is really more of co-packers, more MSOs, and more of a push that we're trying to do to get other people, other state operators at the show. So we're actually going more national, because of the state bottlenecks and opportunities. That's where the opportunity is right now, finding co-packers.
It's interesting. And just, along those lines, just quickly, the beverage industry is sort of built on, the brand and the bottlers, right? So it's not much different, in terms of how that's built. It's been so interesting to chat with both of you and, sort of get a sense of what's going on both on the regional side and even though it is fragmented, honestly, it's people like you that are bringing us all together, and really, not only helping with the business of the business, but helping with the community of the business. And George, to your point earlier, our love for the plant brings us all together, and
you can't lose sight of that.
That's
and
right.
we can't let the legacy people, not have a seat at the table either.
Agreed.
Well said.
And it's these conversations that keep it alive and keep it real. So, George, thank you so much. Sid, thank you so much. We'll see you at your shows, and thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate what you do.
Super. Thanks, Adriana. Thanks, David. Thanks, George. Nice to catch up. Thanks for everyone attending. I will just end with this, that this is a really positive industry. You know, people are so bullish and optimistic here, and I think that is the DNA of this industry. We are seeing proof in the pudding every week, every day. More things are opening up. So just matter of big players jumping in, and they'll jump in when the laws are written.
Right. You're right.
Well said. I'm not going to say anything else other than thank you to our hosts, David and Adriana, and Sid. It was great chatting with you today as well.
Right on.
Thank you.
You both stay tuned. There's more to come.
Thanks, Evan.
Come back anytime. Bye.
Wow.
We didn't get a chance to answer a couple of the questions that our attendees dropped in. So Aaron, I'm sorry. We'll try to address your question. And to my mom, sorry, we'll try to get to your question next. But thank you for joining us and participating. It's been really fun.
Thank you, everybody. And we'll be back next week, March 30th. I can't believe it's the end of March, but we'll be back next week, March 30th, 11 a.m. PST, 2 p.m. EST, and we'll be with Heather Florio chatting about CPG and wellness, the Cannabis Connection. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to check out brandingbud.com, cannabis's best kept secret. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Bye.